Welcome to a live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And we've got a great show for you tonight, trying to figure out why my mute button keeps muting. I hope the COE is not behind that. But again, welcome to another powerhouse show. Today, we're back on Bryan Kohberger, or as Detective Phil Waters likes to call him, the evildoer. The case revolving around Bryan Kohberger, the suspect accused of savagely murdering the Idaho Four by stabbing them all to death, appears to be in a bit of chaos with questions looming about the grand jury. And we're also learning more details about that awful night between the surviving roommates. We want to remind everyone that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And best guest tonight, the woman who had to quickly switch over to her phone because she's having some laptop or computer issues, Jean Fisher. You're looking at one of the longest-serving Ada County, Idaho prosecutors ever to hold a job. She was in the Special Crimes Unit for nearly 33 years as the Special Crimes Unit chief. During law school, Jean interned at the prosecutor's office before being hired directly out of law school in 1989. By 97, as I said, she became the boss of the unit. And then you've got Tara Malik. She's an Idaho licensed attorney. You know her well. She's been on the show many times. She practices in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has experience in both civil and criminal law. And last but not least, the man himself from Oklahoma originally, the guy who is exponentially better than Dr. Phil. You've got Dr. Roger Rhodes. He's a therapist in private practice in Greenville, South Carolina, specializing in dysfunctional relationships, and he has, in fact, worked with prisoners behind bars. Before we get going, the usual reminders, please, if you can, try to support us on Patreon and YouTube. We're cranking out many hours of content a week, and it is a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of work. And if you can't do that, look at Mick Spunky here. This guy just gifted 20 memberships on YouTube, and I was calling him MC Spunky for a while. Laura Waldy coming to us from Canada, gifting 5 true crime memberships. We do not have a better community anywhere in true crime. I always say best guest, better community. If, you know, I totally understand inflation and everything else. If it's tough economically, please, no matter what, give us 5 stars on Apple or on Spotify. Those 5 stars on audio, believe it or not, help us get sponsors and advertisers and go a very long way for us. So please do that. Of course, before we get going here, let's put up what it's all about here. And I'm going to have the COE get rid of that comment there. We're looking at Ethan Chapin on the left, the victim. We've got Maddie Mogan, Kaylee Gonzalez, and of course, Zuzana Kernodal, the victims in all this. Let us not forget them. It is easy to do that sometimes. We're going to start off. This is going to be kind of a strange episode because there's a lot of weird stuff, for lack of a better word. I'm sure Dr. Roger Rhodes loves that word, but it is what's going on here. There's a lot of speculation and a lot of stories out there and a lot of innuendo. So we're going to try to break it down and get the psychologist's perspective on that. But before we get there, Jean Fisher, there was supposed to be a pre-trial indictment hearing on September 22nd, and it has now been pushed to October 26th, and it's because of some sort of uncited illness. Well, an illness has been cited, but we don't know who is ill or why. Is a commonplace, and they're going to be discussing the grand jury issue here, which we're going to get to in a moment. But is it unusual for a pretrial indictment hearing to be postponed like this?
I mean, there's lots of reasons for continuances and postponements, and like we said, we don't know what the what the issue is and who is sick. But I suspect that if it were somebody that were lead counsel in this case, and that was very important to the case, and they really needed that medical attention, it's not unheard of. Remember, Kohberger has already now waived his speedy trial, and so there's not nearly the same emergency or urgency necessarily when somebody provides a pretty good excuse for needing some more time.
Tara, the defense has been public. They say that they want the indictment tossed out on procedural grounds. What does that mean in English, and why are they looking to do this? And is this just a tactic?
Well, they have a right to challenge the indictment. Statutorily, there are only certain grounds that you can challenge an indictment on and seek to have it basically tossed out. And so, some of the responsibilities when you're doing grand jury proceeding are different than a preliminary hearing. In a preliminary hearing, you've got the defense present as well. So the defense is making objections, they're cross-examining witnesses if they want to cross-examine. When you're in a grand jury proceeding, it's just the prosecution, the witnesses, and the grand jurors. It's very closed. And so because of that, it is the duty of the prosecution to make sure that the evidence that they are admitting in before the grand jury follows all the rules of evidence. They have to make sure that the grand jurors that are picked, don't have a particular bias. So it's really incumbent. It's like the burden is on the prosecution, the state, to follow all the rules that normally would be in place, or almost all the rules that normally would be in place if you went to like a preliminary hearing, which we didn't do here. So if they didn't follow those rules, then what happens is the defense, after the indictment comes out, they have an opportunity to review certain records. And if they believe that some of those rules were not followed and an indictment would not have come out of that grand jury proceeding, they can go and challenge it on those particular grounds.
Ketchup already asking, can we do a live poll regarding allowing cameras at trial? Let me know in the chat whether you think that should be happening or not. And Gene, to you, I didn't know this. I'm not an attorney, and I didn't know that the defense can challenge the indictment. How often does this happen? Is this a typical tactic?
I don't think it's typical. I think that anytime that a case involves a murder of this sort, it's a little bit more difficult when it goes to a grand jury because, as Tara said, it's closed to public. It's just the prosecutor asking the questions. And the prosecutor is also sort of acting as a judge, in that they're having to pay real close attention to the evidence to make sure that whatever they're admitting is acceptable and admissible evidence. So when you don't have the defense there getting to cross-examine anybody, it leaves the defense with more questions about how the evidence was presented. Now, they will have, and do have by now, I presume, a transcript of the entire proceeding that they can read and look at that. I have not understood that any motion that they're filing has been based so far on evidence that was presented as much as some perceived problems. For instance, they thought that they should have drawn a bigger pool of grand jurors from which to pick your ultimate numbers that sat. They are relying on they're relying on this kind of archaic reading of the grand jury about what the burden of proof is. So they're relying on some procedural issues, but I haven't heard that they're necessarily relying on anything substantive as of yet.
By the way, it was Tara's first time back with our new artwork, our new studio here. We're actually in a studio now. We've moved on up to the east side, as they used to say, on the Jeffersons. And for those who do not know, that is my lovely mother wagging her finger at me, and that is my beloved Mabel Rose, who passed away at 17. And then over this shoulder, right on that table, there's a book that was written by my dad in 1971. And I'm about to have my own book published. I wish he didn't make me as large as he made me, but that is me drinking a scotch, basically trying to numb myself from the pain of my mother yelling at me. But that is the new studio. We've got another angle that we're going to work on getting you as well. And it was painted by a Miami street artist named Andrew Hayes, very talented guy. Although my kids asked, why does grandma have a beard? But I told them that is shadowing. That is not a beard. Dr. Raj, to you.
Yes, sir.
This is not on my list to ask you, but, there was an article in the New York Times that came out, and I met this writer, Mike Baker, very decent guy. He is the bureau chief out of Seattle. He wrote, I was at CrimeCon. He wrote a piece about CrimeCon, and he was writing about Stacy Chapin, victim Ethan Chapin's mother. Ethan is a triplet, and there was a talk given, and she showed up at the talk. And she said it was just so bizarre for herself to find her. She's never into the true crime genre. It was very, she was out of sorts being at CrimeCon. On the one hand, she said it was, exactly that, odd and weird and strange. But on the other hand, it was very warm and comforting. How crazy must it be? Because we're going to get into some of the other people involved in this case, victim-wise. How bizarre is it for them to be living this out with people like us talking about them when prior to last November, they were just like you and I, just sort of in the background and not these big public figures? How weird must that be for them?
I'm just wondering, didn't you take that class in school, Mass Murder 101?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why you're not prepared, nor they did. They didn't take that class. There isn't that class. We're expecting these people to know all of how you handle a mass murder. No, they're all unschooled. They're just showing up and, paddling water, trying to keep their head above the water.
By the way, Tennis Girl, we got a couple of Texans on here. Welcome to Tennis Girl, friend of the show. Joyce Kirby is here. I think she's in Texas too. I think that's what I just saw. But Raj, to you, we've got Tali and Henshie's in Jerusalem. Tali is in Tel Aviv. I don't know if she's in the chat right now, but she did tweet at me and said that she needed to have an owie from Raj to make her feel better in Israel.
Buddy, get it done. That's what we got. Yeah, man. In the news, don't read the Bible. Don't mess with the Jews. Come on, get a deal. You don't mess with the Jewish people. That's nutty. How?
Raj, there's just crazy despair all over that. You cannot turn on the TV, the radio, anything without now seeing babies murdered. I mean, the most horrific of horrific things. What is your advice to people? I think people's anxiety. Tomorrow they've called for a worldwide day of jihad. The leaders of the terrorist organizations. What's your advice to people? I had a friend, I'm not going to name him, who's on this show, and he actually called me kind of crying today. It was very emotional, just saying he feels awful about what's going on in the world. And I did not intend to ask you this. And right now I can hear my mother screaming at me, don't talk about this stuff. It's not the right place. But Raj,
I love your mom. She's
all I do is hear her voice in my head 24/7. But what's your advice to people who are feeling the pain that we're seeing in the world right now?
Oh man. Here's what it's like to be part of bad history. This is not new. This is not like these people first time on their radio. I mean, this is not their first rodeo. They've been there, done that, got the T-shirt. Gosh, it's a tough life. And what I would hope that they would do is take a step back and look at history and make a decision from there. I think that would behoove everybody in this issue. Take a step back, read history.
It's interesting. I was telling the person that called me the other day, I asked a therapist, not my therapist, a therapist on the show, although I need about 7 myself, but there was a therapist on the show, and I asked him prior to this war, prior to the war in Ukraine obviously is going on, but all these terrible things. And I said, what's one of the big factors in people feeling not great these days? And that person on STS said, algorithms. And I thought that was an amazing answer because social media is pumping out things that they know are going to addict you, upset you, catch your attention, and a lot of it is bad news. So I thought that was fascinating, actually, that the world has changed technologically speaking to the point that algorithms are now influencing how we think. Vintage Mama says, love Dr. Raj, and gave us a super sticker for that. Back to Kohberger. I promise we will stay there. So again, Tara, the defense tried to dismiss this indictment back in July. So they've been at this for a while. One of the issues that they're talking about here is an error in giving instructions to the grand jury. This seems to me, as a non-attorney, as something that's very petty, but why can it be important, and why, in your opinion, should it or should it not be challenged?
Well, I don't think that they're going to be successful in challenging this indictment or succeeding in getting it thrown out. I mean, that's just my personal opinion based on what I've seen so far. Back to what we were talking about before and what Jean was saying as well, which is it's really the prosecution's duty to instruct. Normally, in like a preliminary hearing or trial setting, you've got a judge there, right? Who's going to be instructing on the law. There's going to be some parameters that are set out. The judge kind of oversees the proceedings. Here, where it's just the prosecutor in the grand jury proceeding, it is their duty to instruct on what the standard, the burden of proof is. It's their duty to instruct on the elements of the crime without anybody else there, without a judge there. So if the prosecution came and gave the wrong standard, for instance, and said, it has to be a lower standard than what the prosecution's duty is, then that would be a problem. And that grand jury indictment could be thrown out. I don't believe that happened here, but that's one of the arguments that they're trying to make.
Christina Jones says, hello, STS from Seattle, sleepless in Seattle, reading while Idaho slept today. I'm going to have the author of While Idaho Slept, J. Reuben Appleman. He's coming on the show. He's a private investigator and a true crime author. He's going to be on the show 1 week from today, next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. That is booked. So be here for that as well. He was really focused on the victims in the story, and we'll, buckle down and get to him about what he found out on his quest for answers. He says it was a weird experience because he basically just, the minute this happened, his daughter, by the way, went to the University of Idaho, and he lived in Boise for, I think, 20 years. So he said he felt like it was a story in his backyard, and that's why he went. He said he just got a motel room and basically lived in Moscow. So we will talk to him about how he got to writing While Idaho Slept. Ned Smith reminding me that Texas, Joel, it's a place in the USA. I've heard of it, and that's where he's
Wait a minute. What you need to tell him is Boomer Sooner.
There you go. You're talking to Oklahoma guy here.
Yeah, we won. Yeah.
So Gene, in August, the defense then came out and they cited 4 more legal challenges related to the grand jury. And they cited them, but they did not give details. And from what I understand, they're sort of under the details of this are under seal. But one of the claims here is of grand jury bias. What does that tell you? What does that mean in English again? What would grand jury bias mean?
Well, where these murders occurred is in Moscow, Idaho, which is in Latah County, and Latah County is a relatively small county. I don't know the whole population, but because of the number that live in that community, I think that they should have found a grand jury that wasn't so close to the community. I fully expect that when the case goes to trial, that there will be a change of venue, a motion for a change of venue that would be granted in this case, and it'll get moved out of Moscow and Latah County to another jurisdiction a little farther removed. So what they're arguing is that for the same reason down the line that there should be a change of venue for a jury trial, that they should have brought this case perhaps in a different venue just for this grand jury proceeding. I don't think they're going to be successful in that, because this really is just a probable cause hearing. And the burden for probable cause is that a crime probably happened and that the defendant probably committed it. And I don't think that you needed a change of venue in order for that to happen, but that's what they're going to be arguing.
Ned Smith with an excellent point here. What happened to the stream last night that followed the Rachel Morin stream? What happened to that is rescheduled for this coming Wednesday. We've got Lauren Sharf, who's been all over the Suzanne Morphew case. She's interviewed her husband, Barry Morphew. Obviously, her remains were found. He was a prime suspect at one point. So we're going to have her on the show this Wednesday. And yours truly, the knucklehead, forgot to delete it. So I'm sure plenty of people were waiting. So my apologies. I tweeted out that it was my fault. So apologies about that. But we're going to have Lauren Sharf on. There was a scheduling conflict with her, and we're going to have her back on this Wednesday. Tar, to you, just a more macro photo as we look at some more photos of the victims here. You got Ethan and Zahn on your left, and Maddie and Kaylee on the right there. Pull back the curtain for us. What is, we're kind of in this middle ground period. There's all these stories flying out there, and there's this hearing coming up. But what is Ann Taylor, for the defense team? What does she do when she wakes up every day now? What do you think she's doing?
Well, I'm sure this case is weighing heavy on her mind. It is a tough role to be a defense attorney. I'm a former prosecutor. I don't think I would make a great defense attorney. I think it's really hard in cases like this, especially where people were murdered in the prime of their life, to be the defense attorney in the case. Having said that, there's a role for defense attorneys. They really do need to keep the prosecution to its burden. They provide resistance to make sure that, justice is done the right way, using the right tools and rules in our justice system. But I think everyone is human here, and I can't imagine that, it's not having an effect on her as well. She's going to be the person who's going through with her team the evidence, the discovery that's being turned over by the state. Those are going to include, I'm sure, photographs of the scene of the crime, photographs of the victims. And so, one of the things that she's going to have to do, and I'm sure she's doing, is kind of compartmentalizing that right now as well, in order for her to be able to do her job here.
And Jean, I can't imagine that she could effectively work really any other cases, because this is just so high profile. So same question to you. What do you think she's dealing with sort of on a day-to-day basis right now?
Yeah, I agree with Tara as far as, the weight of the case. Unfortunately for her, she probably does have a few other cases that she's having to make other appearances on. She's the lead public defender in Kootenai County, which is actually about 90 miles north of Moscow. And that's a whole nother county with another jurisdiction. And, chances are she probably is still making some appearances on a few other cases, just as the prosecutor is. Remember, they are responsible not for this case as well as every other case that comes into their jurisdiction. And so, unfortunately, unless you have a really large office, you don't get the freedom to just solely be involved in one case. And so there's a lot of juggling that's going on. There is kind of some flat time, if you will, during these proceedings where there's not always something going on. Motions are done and you're reviewing evidence and you write your briefs, and then, off to the other side it goes, to the court, and then they, set it for hearing. And while you may have time that you need to prepare for that, it's not like every minute of every day, they're going through this and going over the file and going over the evidence and ruminating over and over on things that they know. So she's got her hands full for sure with this case. And of course, as it gets closer, things will ramp up for her, but I'm certain that she has other things that are occupying her time as well.
Old lady Snoop, I hope Joel tells us where Carm is today. I'll tell you exactly where she is. She just finished food shopping, talked to my mom an unhealthy amount of times every day. And every time we talk, all she says to me is, I don't want to talk right now. I'm too agitated about what's going on. And then she proceeds to talk, and we talk. And then eventually she's at the stage of life where she likes to FaceTime. Most often it is upside down because she's driving, and then she will just click off. And then I call her back and I say, you didn't say goodbye. You should always say goodbye, and I love you. And then she tells me to F off again. And we go through that process a few times. And that's why I hope everyone reads the book so they can see what a day in my life is like. And wonderful woman. This what's going on right now. I'm going to date myself right now, but I lived in Israel during the 73 war with my parents, and she's not taking this very well. Let's put it that way. And I've got 2 nephews through marriage who are both now been up north on the Lebanon border. So she's very nervous, to say the least. Ski Hat Sarah is here. She says, hey, y'all. The ski hat is back on. Raj, I'm going to ask you a weird question here.
Ooh,
You're probably wonder why I'm.
Wait a minute. First thing I want to say to you is nothing beats mother love. Nothing. I don't care what you're talking about. If your mother loves you, man, put a star on your name.
Someone sent me a meme. It says, close your ears, Carm, but it says when your mom is no longer here, you will realize you are now missing your one true friend. Brought tears to my eyes.
Yes.
I never want to know that. Told Carm I need her to live to at least 110. So look at this.
Amen.
Cranky Fig says, I want a mute button for my husband. Dr. Raj can arrange that. Raj, so look, there's defense attorneys.
The guy, Dan, that's what I'd say.
Defense attorneys have a very important job in this country because God forbid anyone ever finds himself in a situation, and I have tremendous respect for them. And they always tell you that, that's the line that they give you, that we've got to defend people. But what do you think it weighs like on the mind of a public defender or a defense attorney if in the back of their mind they know they're defending someone who is guilty? Is it rationalized by the fact that they have a job to do? Do you think there's an element of guilt or remorse? What do you think goes on in the mind of, a defense attorney?
The first thing, the word that comes out is overwhelmed. Okay. I wouldn't want to be either side of the attorneys. Overwhelmed. And these are people that professionally train to focus on their client. They have that skill set. And I love Mara, who said, well, I wouldn't want to do that. I'm saying good choice, good way of looking at it. Everything isn't for everybody, and this is a high level, stressful, out of control moment for these people.
Tara, so one of the other issues, use of improper evidence. That is something else that the defense is citing. And again, most of the details surrounding this are under seal. I'm assuming, and I'm probably wrong, it has to do with DNA, but do we have any idea? And by the way, shout out to Catherine Regier and her beautiful dog. She's in Maui, where hopefully they're, picking themselves up after what happened there. But to you, Tara, what about use of improper evidence?
Well, I'm not, and maybe Gene knows, but I'm not sure of the ins and outs of what improper evidence they're going to be attacking. I've heard that they're trying to attack kind of the genealogy area and the way that they kind of narrowed it down to Kohberger's family and then ultimately to Kohberger. But improper evidence is really the same thing. It falls again on the duty of the prosecutor to make sure that what they are admitting into evidence follows the rules of evidence. So there are rules for criminal procedure about how a criminal case has to proceed. And then there's also, in addition to the rules of criminal procedure, you've got a separate set of rules, and it's called the rules of evidence. And so whatever piece of evidence that you're trying to admit into the proceedings has to follow and comply with the rules of evidence. Certain things just don't come in under the rules, or if they come in, you have to follow a particular process in order to get them in. And so when we're talking about improper evidence, we're talking about, did they admit something? Did they allow the grand jurors to see something, to consider something that under the rules would not be permissible here?
By the way, totally different case, but this is our OG true crime case that we started with. Dan Markel, his ex-brother-in-law, Charlie Adelson's about to stand trial in Tallahassee for his murder all the way back in 2014. 2 hitmen and a female go-between have already been convicted. And now the ex-mother-in-law and father-in-law, Donna and Harvey Adelson, tried to wiggle their way out, saying that they're just going to invoke their 5th. I have to be honest, I don't understand all the legal issues surrounding this, but the judge basically said they've got to testify because of however things were prepared. Again, I plead ignorance here, but we'll figure out exactly why. So they're going to be interviewed at an FBI office in Tallahassee on October 17th, and we're going to be discussing all this with much sharper minds, legal minds than myself. And that is going to happen on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Bonnie Lee Lopez, today is Ruth Markel's 79th birthday. Looks like they are battening down the hatches on the family. So happy birthday to Ruth, who's become a good friend of myself and Steve Cohen. And for anyone who's in South Florida, we're going to be doing a live talk with both Dennis Murphy of Dateline. There's going to be a new 2-hour special on Dan Markel coming out after the trial, and we're going to have Dennis Murphy on Dan Markel, Ruth Markel, myself, and the Florida State Attorney out of Palm Beach County, Dave Arenberg, live. I believe it is December 20th. Anybody who's in South Florida should come and check us out, and I'll let you know as we get closer. Gene Fisher, to you, this use of improper evidence, anything to add there? Does this have anything to do with potentially the DNA? And real quickly, the Evil CJ Show, $10 super sticker. Thank you for that, Gene.
Well, I don't know if it involves the DNA or what they use of the DNA. I know that is definitely an issue that they are going to fight about before a jury. So I'm sorry. I just don't know if that's what was presented or not, or how far they went down that with him. But I presume that they presented some DNA in order to identify him. Remember, things change too. As this goes forward, I understand that they still want to have a right to go back and challenge some of the grand jury. But in the meantime, Kohberger, and his team filed what they said was an alibi defense, and their alibi defense was that he is just out driving around at 4 a.m, and which is not an alibi, right? And that's not been accepted. But he's already made some admissions. He's like, yeah, I was out at 4 a.m, and yeah, I might have driven by King Road because I was out and about. So where they might have had some defense before about, was it his car that was going down the Pullman Highway? Did they see it was his phone on and then off and then back on? Well, he's admitted to that now by saying he was out and about, which is an interesting tactic, because it's not an alibi, but he's really given, I think, the state a gift, because they don't have to prove that he was him out and about, because he's already filed it in motions.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So we have Detective Phil Waters, who's going to be with us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. He's got one of the highest clearance rates as a retired homicide detective from the Houston PD. And he said flat out, he goes, that's not an alibi, it's an admission. And I just heard you use that word. Gene,
Yep.
Is that how you view it?
Absolutely. It's strong evidence. It makes the state's case. It is just cut down 20 witnesses, right? They don't have to go through all the cell towers and all the different forensic information on the phones. They're not going to have to do all of the videos and where was it stored and where was it kept on his route, because he's admitted, I was out and about and I was in the area. So he's probably given the state 20 less witnesses to cut right to the chase. I was out, and no alibi has come forward. I think that is a real, I was really disappointed, honestly, with the defense that they did that, because one, they know better. It's not an alibi, but what it also does is it invites, I'm sorry, but it invites the potential crazy wacko out there to say, oh yeah, I was out on the road the back road, and I saw that car when they may never have to introduce themselves into this case. I mean, nobody's come forward on it. I think it was not an alibi. And anyway, I was disappointed with that.
Black Widow coming to us from the Republic of Ireland. Go ahead, Dr. Raj. How dare I cut you off?
It's called the cheating spouse excuse.
Yeah,
Elaborate.
Yeah.
That's the same. Oh, I wasn't over at somebody's house. I was driving around. Okay, yeah. Checks in the mail. No, it's sad. It's sad.
So, Tara, if Ann Taylor is such a shrewd public defender, why does she make this mistake, which appears to be a mistake, according to Jean?
I agree with Jean. I mean, I don't know why they would come out and give an alibi like that. An alibi is, here's where you typically see an alibi. You see an alibi when someone says, I couldn't have done it. I was at a party with 30 people. Here are all their names. Here's all the evidence that I've got that shows that I wasn't there. It wasn't me. And to say you're driving around, perhaps it was because they had to turn it over. There's a really tight turnaround time under the rules about when you have to disclose your alibi. And perhaps they were just throwing something out there to see if it stuck. But I agree. I mean, this is not an alibi at all. What it does is it corroborates part of the state's theory of the case. I do think it cuts down on witnesses and just a note that they're still exchanging discovery in this case. And they're going to be looking at all sorts of data and forensic data as well. And if this car had some sort of navigation device, you can pull data from a navigation device in a car. And this is an older car, but if there's navigation data there, it might corroborate the fact that, yeah, he was out and about, but his driving, he was going to this house. So, without having that information, if they were still in the midst of discovery and they didn't have that information and they threw out this alibi, I think that was definitely not the best move out there. And the only thing that I can come up with to answer your question is that they felt like they had to do something.
Yeah. And Jean, you kind of mentioned this briefly, but how, by the way, thank you to Bonnie Lee Lopez in Vermont with her cute dog who just gave us 5 stars. Again, if you can't help us with Patreon or YouTube, 5-star reviews really do go a very long way. We want to get ourselves in the top 50 or so of eventually top 3, top 2, top 1. Is there a top 1? We want to be 1 on audio. So we've got to get those 5 stars. Conor McGregor, a UFC fighter. I'm not a big fan of his, but he says we're not here to take part. We're here to take over. And that's what STS is going to do. Jean, how does this open the door legally for the state now that they've gotten this alibi / admission? What kind of leeway? What does it give them?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think that the state always has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's not like the defense has just handed them something that they wouldn't otherwise have to prove, and the defense doesn't have to stipulate anything. But it's going to be much harder for the defense to raise any sort of straight-faced objection to the state's presentation when it comes to the forensic analysis of the GPS or the phones, that sort of thing, when they've already made these admissions. And then in addition to that, it's kind of following along with some of the behavior that was observed of Kohberger when he was back in Pennsylvania. I mean, remember, they were watching his house, watching him very closely, and he's out and about. He's out at 4 a.m. He's observed out at 4 a.m. He's observed wearing gloves, taking garbage from his house to a neighbor's house, wearing gloves at odd, weird hours of the time. I mean, it's not normal behavior, but it's behavior consistent with him being out and about. And so I think that it's a lot harder for the defense to do it with a straight face objection and really get anywhere with this.
Shout out to Jersey Jen Castaldi from my home state. Love this panel. Woo wee. And Tara and Jean, and then Ned Smith making the very eloquent, obvious point here. McSpunky is McGenerous. He's given out a lot of memberships, so that is very kind of him. 2 other quick points related to the law, and then we'll dive into all the other stuff. So again, lack of sufficient evidence to indict is one of the arguments that will be made by the defense. And then the final one is that the state is withholding evidence from the grand jury. Withholding evidence. Tara, what does that mean?
Well, we don't know yet how the defense is going to flesh this argument out, but if there was some sort of potentially exculpatory evidence that they thought was, this is like the smoking gun to show that he in fact didn't commit these crimes, that's what they mean. That's what they're trying to go after here. Again, based on what we know right now, we're not privy to the discovery yet. We haven't seen all the facts. A lot of that is going to come out at trial. I can't imagine what that is. I think the biggest issue that we've kind of talked about, and I don't know that it's necessarily something that's going to sway one way or another, is this DNA evidence that they were talking about and narrowing it down to Kohberger. But beyond that, I haven't heard or seen anything that there's some sort of big exculpatory piece of evidence out there, that is going to just say that we've got the wrong guy.
Laura Sanders Realty. How do you become a member? I have no idea. I just host a show, but luckily there are mods there. I just do what I'm told to do. But the STS chief of everything is right here telling people to hit the like button. So she and Gen X Granny, I'm not T-Pain. Here we go. Here's Nightbot telling you where you can find Patreon. You can become a patron on Patreon. So moving along here. So this part of the show, I'm a little concerned about, and I'll tell you why. There have been some stories written, and I question the integrity of these stories as a former broadcast journalist, but they're everywhere. So I think they're important to be discussed. And the Gonzalez family has sort of been dragged into the story. And we'll start with this. The Gonzalez family, I just am finding this out, and I've got some other statements from them, but they say that someone essentially hacked them and was communicating with journalists and other people, and that's how these stories got written. So the Gonzalez family has appealed, saying that there were text message screenshots that were literally made up, and they write, "Hello, friends and family. We long debated saying anything at all about recent events here, especially because we really do try to maintain a positive and safe space. But given how much support we have here, we felt we needed to ask for your help. We recently were made aware of some messages claiming to have fabricated texts from Steve Gonzalez, as well as trying to incite others to spread lies. While we understand the internet is a big place and people are free to say whatever they would like, we personally feel a line was crossed and we would like to pursue further action. If anyone knows more about these screenshots," it goes on, basically saying that, again, that they've crossed a line. Dr. Raj, what's the matter with people that they would target a victim's family here, and we're taking the Gonzalez's at their word, and literally fabricate, make up text messages of things that they said, when in reality they're saying they didn't say them at all? How problematic is that?
It can be very problematic, that people are dealing with the internet like it's real people, and not that it's a show, and they're not questioning where it's exactly come from. And that's difficult because back in the day, you saw the people, you heard the people, you had a line of connections that was verified. But now you can make up crap, put it on the internet, throw people off, and it makes getting to the truth very, very hard, very hard. And so people that do that have a way of making money. At the core of all that, if there's somebody at the bottom making money off of misinformation.
Ned Smith saying yes to cameras. So this is the person who's in question here. This guy's name is Howard Blum. He's a writer for a publication called Airmail, and he's written some controversial articles. He says that they are true, and we'll talk about the content of them in a moment. The Gonzalez family says no way. His quote here is, "Steve had been told that the two survivors allegedly had not only been awake while the killings had taken place, but they had heard everything. This airmail report states. More astonishingly, his grand jury sources allege that the two girls had been texting one another as the murder methodically went from one room to the next. We are talking here about Madison and Kaylee, and the two young women in the middle here, Madison and Kaylee. Of course, that's Ethan and Zana Kernodle on the far left and far right. But what's at issue here is prior to this story coming out in the publication called Airmail, it had been reported that the roommates, the surviving victims, and I'm not going to mention their names on the show, that they were asleep, that they were fast asleep. And now, according to this story, they are claiming that they were texting each other. Gene Fisher, you've been doing this many, many years, over 3 decades. Are you disturbed by the fact that this story is not only being reported widely, but that it might not be accurate or true? And how does this impact a potential jury pool?
I think it's really disturbing. I mean, let's just back up for a second. These kids, they were, these young adults, they were all roommates, right? They liked each other. They lived with each other. What happened in that home was absolutely horrific. And to think that two young adults were just, hanging around downstairs, texting and remarking about what was going on without doing it. It's so disturbing. Now, the fact of the matter is, I don't believe it, but chances are the jury's never going to hear that kind of evidence anyway. It's not substantiated at all. And somebody's just doing it, like you said, to sell some news and to be a grabber of headlines and to muck it up. But that's not what's going to go into the courtroom. I mean, that's not the evidence that people are going to hear. It's all this noise outside of the courtroom that's going on in so many of our really big cases right now, that people think that, you're going to be able to bring in all of these outside factors and people with wild notions, and that the jury's going to hear it. And in the end, the courtroom is this very staid courtroom with the rules, and people follow them, and what comes in is what's allowed to come in, and all this other stuff stays out. And that's what gives me the most faith in our judicial system, because when it actually comes to going to trial, we do follow rules. What comes in is what's allowed to come in. It gets reviewed, and jurors understand the evidence that they have. And I feel I have a lot of faith in that. I think that this is just malicious fodder, and terribly mean, to not only to those two surviving people, who I think are going through an enormous amount of emotional upheaval in their lives, but to the whole victims and their families, and what they must be suffering to hear that kind of crap, quite frankly.
Like when Gene Fisher says that. Pam Hart Young became a YouTube member. Thank you very much. And I'm just blanking on his name, but we mentioned this last week. There was an author who spoke to the surviving roommate's father, according to reports, and he said that one of the two surviving roommates is obviously getting trauma therapy and is really having a hard time, and is barely able to, is just kind of getting back into interacting socially through playing video games, because that's all she can handle at this point. So these are real people, with real lives. Go ahead, Raj.
My father was an editor of a paper. And one of the things he said is, if a dog bites a man, nobody buys a paper. But if you can get a man biting a dog, you sell a lot. This is a man biting a dog moment.
Raj, which paper? I never knew this till today.
Oh, yeah. The Wewoka Daily News in Wewoka, Oklahoma, my father was editor of the paper.
And where's that paper today? Does it still exist?
I believe so. He's no longer the editor. He became the director of the Oklahoma Wheat Commission. We're just a bunch of old Okies.
For a guy from New Jersey, how do you spell Wewoka? I'm going to look this up.
Wewoka.
Wewoka. There you go.
Wewoka, sorghum capital of Oklahoma.
You learn something new every day. From Simone M. for Tara, do you think Kohberger is directing the defense, the weak alibi, et cetera, et cetera? Do you think they are listening to Bryan Kohberger?
Well, they have to an extent. He is the client. He does have a say in his case. But, strategic decisions are also really up to the attorneys that are representing you. So how much, he demanded that they do this type of alibi and put it out there, we don't know. That might have been what he told his defense team and said, this is what I was doing. And they ran with that. I mean, I don't think that, the defense is going to make something up without talking to, that the defense is going to make something up, period. And they're certainly not going to put something out there that they haven't talked to their client about either. So I'm sure he's aware. I'm sure he had some input, but I still think that's not an alibi, and it's pretty weak if that's all they got.
And Gene, back to you on this. So obviously there's a gag order in place. And if there's a gag order in place, why are so many stories seemingly squirming out of different areas and coming to the surface?
Sells papers. It keeps people.
There you go. It sure does, doesn't it?
I mean, it keeps people talking. It makes internet fodder. It just gives people something to do. It's disturbing and troubling, and it's happening in so many of our cases, our big cases. But like I said, and ultimately, I really do have faith that the jury will hear what it is that they're supposed to hear, and make decisions based on the law and not on this other fodder that other people are making money off of.
And then
this is not new. People have spread crap since day one, you know, and I am so glad to hear of a strong, structured legal system. That's where justice comes from.
Yep.
So just to get back to the facts on this case from the probable cause affidavit, at least one of the surviving roommates saw something suspicious. This is according to the PCA. Court documents that were unveiled back in January. This is 5 months before the grand jury indictment. And then one of the roommates thought she heard someone say there's someone here, or she said there's someone here, and then peeked out and overheard a male saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." And the presumption there, of course, is that was Bryan Kohberger, but we don't, know even for sure yet. And we're going to find out. So back to this guy, just to show you his face for a minute. And again, I think it's important to talk about this because this is now, created a lot of buzz and a lot of concern. But this is this guy, Howard Blum, 75 years old. Now, he put out sort of a statement of his own saying that he insists that the profile of the grieving father was created. It's an interesting word, created via interviews with people close to him, as well as a trove, quote unquote, trove of texts. So he is claiming it is true. Raj, you're looking at this guy, and I don't want to throw this guy under the bus. But
I think he ran under the bus. You didn't throw him anywhere.
I mean, assuming this is not true for a moment, that none of this is true, and maybe some of it is, but what would drive someone to fabricate a story? I mean, I'm hoping he didn't just do that, but what would drive someone to do? I mean, I know what you just said about your dad selling papers.
Money changes everything. There's an old term called yellow journalism back in the day, and it's how people put stuff out there that they couldn't prove, but it sold papers. And hey, the internet is full of crap that people read as if it's gospel. How poor is that? But it's just yellow journalism on an internet scale.
No.
And if you don't think who was he before he did this? Who knew him? Who gave him $1 before this? My thinking is nobody. But he comes out and does this, and look at me, look at me, look at what I found, look at what I found, and ooh-wee, everybody's gonna, I want to see that. You know, man bites dog. That's what we got here. That's him. He's a man bites dog publisher.
Ski Hat Sarah says Roger would fit right in Nashville and Oklahoma. He fit right in Miami. What are you talking about? Shout out to Allie becoming a new member here. Love that. Dr. Raj, let me ask you a serious question here. Not that the others weren't serious, but if you were put in the position of counseling the 2 surviving roommates after what they went through, how would you approach that?
I would put them into PTSD treatment. That they are obviously traumatized. These are young people. This is not mature adults. These are college kids. They're in a formation stage. And so, you know, it's just like if you would deal with someone who came in and said, I've been part of the war. Yeah, wait. We need to have a specific program, step by step, of how to deal with you. This is not something that's going to go away in a day or even a week of good therapy. This is years investment in helping them learn how to deal with the trauma. See, they've been traumatized. That's the bad thing about those kids. And do I hope they're getting treatment? Yes. Are they going to need treatment? Yes. And
they're not only just being traumatized by what's happened, but they're traumatized if they hear any of all this other fodder too. I mean, because it's really hard to imagine the depths that people will go to be so dark and so mean. And when you are already so vulnerable, and then you get this on top of that, I mean, it's real hard.
They're being victim shamed.
Is how metro is Moscow? If I'm thinking it's a tiny place in a whole big state.
Yeah,
it is. Yep.
Imagine gossip and how loud in Moscow that gossip is. What else do they have to talk about?
Yeah, hopefully they're far away. I think one of the victims is now in the Vegas area. But Dr. Raj, when you say PTSD therapy, without getting too deep into it, by the way, Papa Bear is here. AJ McCleary, has anyone challenged a grand jury? We kind of talked about that at the beginning. We can circle back a little bit, but Papa Bear is here from Moscow, Idaho. She's in the chat all the time, obviously the epicenter of all this. But when you say PTSD therapy, what is that? You know, give us just a quick insight into the types of things that they go through in that kind of therapy.
Well, first of all, what happens to people is we pretty much feel like we're in control. You know, we're running our lives, we're making our decisions. So I am a little bit a master of my destiny. When trauma comes up, you lose that control. Okay. So part of PTSD therapy is helping them regain focus on what they can control. That you work on them and having an internal locus of control and not be over focused on an external focus of control. And so that takes a while. Okay. Then what you do is you then review their interactions with other people. And throughout this, you're also intermittently bringing up the trauma to, in a way, desensitize them to it. And when you do that at the end, then they say, okay, I can't control this. It's helping them learn to control the controllable. That's what you're trying to do, helping them control the controllable. Because any element of control has been ripped from their lives.
Pam Hart Young letting us know that Latah County, and I think she lived there for a long time, still might, is about 40,000 people. That's the entire county. Black Widower from the Republic of Ireland. Raj is reminding me of my dad. #issues.
Oh, your dad must have been a good-looking genius, is what I'm thinking.
There you go. So look, I'm expecting to get a little bit of hate mail about this episode. Oh, you're perpetuating this, but again, this is all over the place, and I think it's important to talk about because it'll be interesting to see if any of this actually eventually makes it to the trial. But according to this story, the father of Kaylee Gonzalez, he was trying to run a parallel investigation to law enforcement's investigation, even after the story says that Bryan Kohberger was arrested. And someone asked the writer why. He said that Steve Gonzalez wanted all the facts pertinent to the case. Gene, you know, I have no idea if this is just made up out of whole cloth. I can't imagine this guy would just completely make up the entire thing. But one of the issues at play here is that Steve Gonzalez has been very vocal. He's been out there talking to a lot of people, very angry, understandably. But does that kind of throw a wrench into it because he's been the one father who has been so publicly outspoken?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how far this gets, right? I mean, in my 33 years, I have certainly had some parents out there that wanted to run their own investigation because they just didn't like the answers, or they wanted more information and didn't feel like they were getting what they needed, and they went a little crazy themselves. I mean, they're so traumatized and they're not thinking through straight, and they're trying to have the same sort of control that you're talking about on the show. I mean, they're trying to find answers to things that they're never going to find answers to. And so, there's got to be a lot of grace given to victims and their families when they go through something that is just so traumatic. Whether or not any of that throws a wrench into something that, can affect the jury later on, that's that's really hard to say because, I don't know what that evidence would be. And it's not like anybody gets to just say anything. I mean, we do have very strict laws and rules that this case will move forward on. And so I don't really see that as being something that could be out there. I do think it's incumbent upon prosecutors on occasion to have to work with victims' families and to bring them in and to talk to them about the effects that their actions may have on a case. I've certainly had to do that before. And so, it's not to say that it couldn't have some effect, and prosecutors want to take some control over that so that it doesn't run away from them. If anything, it gives the defense more fodder. If he were to take the stand and they wanted to, question him and, do a bunch of things. But again, you get into a bunch of information that's irrelevant. He's not a law enforcement officer. Whatever investigation he brought up, chances are it's not going to get in anyway. It's just a lot of extra work. And again, I think it's more than anything, it's just a sign of just how traumatic and emotional these cases have been on these families.
Here's a super sticker from KC. Tara, this is for you. Objections are frequently made so as to preserve the issue for subsequent appeals. If you fail to object at the time, this is why I could never get through law school. I would read this 1,000 times before I understood it. If you fail to object at the time when a judge could cure, you lose the right to object at a later date. Makes sense. Tara, does this make sense to you?
It does. And she's right. It's like, if you think about it this way, so during the course of this case right now, we're going through and just finding out whether or not, Kohberger is the one who's committed these murders, right? And so we have to follow procedure in order to do that. Kohberger has a right to an appeal if things don't go his way and if he is found guilty, especially in a case that involves death penalty, which this does. He has appellate rights. So once you go through until the conclusion of the case, jury comes back, let's say they convict him, he can appeal any error down below during this process, but only if he raised the issue, only if he objected to whatever error there was at the time that it was going on. So things like challenging the grand jury indictment, he's got to do here first. He can't bring it up for the first time on an appeal. If during the course of a trial, some evidence, prosecution's trying to bring some evidence in that he thinks can't be brought in under the rules of evidence, he's got to make the objection then and there first. And then he can preserve that issue. He can save that issue and bring it up again to the Court of Appeals and have it heard there. But once you let something pass during this initial stage, you kind of waive your right to create an issue about it later on. It's a general rule. There's some exceptions there.
Jersey Jen, Carm, we love you and miss you and love your family and praying without ceasing. Someone asked, they have not seen Carm, and there's a very simple, sometimes complex questions as to where my mother is, have simple answers, and that is, it's resting on the shoulder of the COE. We've got to figure out how to get a second mic, believe it or not, into the studio. Carm wants back in. She's probably going to be on Wednesday night. I got to get her back in here. So Wednesday night, we're doing 2 shows right now on Suzanne Morphew, and I'm already blanking on the other one, but Suzanne Morphew is a definite, and we're going to try to get her. She's been reading up on Suzanne and Barry Morphew. And hopefully by then, I'm putting all the onus on the COE, and hopefully Space Coast can help out as well. He's an audio file. So hoping to have Carm back then. Gene, to you. So we'll get through the rest of this in faster order here. This is a 6-part article. And by the way, I didn't know this, but I saw someone say that Harvard lawyer Lee, who's been on our show and is a much smarter brain than me, she's dissecting this 6-part article. But in this story that is 6 parts by Howard Blum, Gene Fisher, this is very upsetting if there's any veracity to it at all, claims that Steve Gonzalez, quote unquote, cultivated 2 grand jurors to get information because he was trying to Gene is shaking that head. And I mean, there were some real details here that grand jurors told Steve Gonzalez that Bryan Kohberger bought some sort of Dickies suit, like a coverall suit. Everyone knows the brand Dickies, and that maybe Bryan Kohberger used it to disrobe before leaving the scene. It's troubling, Gene, on many levels, but one of the levels that it is troubling for me on is that it's very detailed. It's talking about a specific brand. Again, I'm naive, but I just can't fathom this guy, Howard Bloom, literally just making this up, just complete fiction. So when you hear these details about literally the type of, overall or whatever you would call it, that he was allegedly wearing, Bryan Kohberger, what goes through your mind hearing this?
Well, I mean, that does make me very worried. Moscow is a very small town. The grand jury that they picked came from that area. It's hard to imagine that he would be able to do this and that other people wouldn't know. If he did do it, it's a big problem. It's a real big problem. It's a real big problem for the state, and he's not doing anybody any favors. If that really did happen, and he had a grand juror and he cultivated that kind of relationship with a grand juror, that's a big problem. What
would it, I mean, I'm going to give Steve Gonzalez and the Gonzalez family all the benefit of the doubt in the world. I'm going to assume that they did not do any of this. I'm going to take their word. But hypothetically, for one moment, if he did cultivate a grand juror or 2, what would it do to the case?
I don't know. I mean, grand jurors are under a continuing oath not to talk about the evidence that they heard during their deliberations and talking about that information while the case is pending. It is a misdemeanor offense to talk about it. But I honestly, I don't know that. I mean, you start getting into some pretty significant legal considerations. If that kind of stuff is out there and leaking and there's that sort of information, it's hard. It's really hard for me to imagine that any of this happened, but I don't know.
What worries me is when I start to hear details like the type of brand of clothing, because that is, if you're fabricating it, Dr. Raj, um, now let's assume.
Wait a minute, let me jump in here.
Yeah,
When people are lying, they use detail. They over detail something that could be said in one sentence.
that's what I was going to ask you.
Okay, yeah, and wait a minute. I have to rethink through this a minute. There's just, you so through me, but nobody is saying that they saw Kohberger at the site other than the one person, and she gave a description that was in the paper. I mean, I don't even know how if a grand juror said that's not even. I mean, I can't imagine that would happen. I don't know where that would have come from. They, no information like that has ever even been produced. Other than specificity with the knife and the type of knife that it was, I am certain that if they knew it was a Dickie overall that was a certain that they would be looking for who purchased Dickie overalls in the Latah County greater metropolitan area. So I'm having a hard time.
Yeah.
I have to rethink that.
Tara, what do you think's going on in Judge's mind right now reading about this? Because he's obviously got to know what's going on. I mean, this is literally what he's trying to avoid. This is becoming a complete circus and total like mayhem. And by the way, I'm going to say this again. I'm going to get people who yell at me. I'm going to get some hate mail. Luckily, I've been yelled at for my whole life, so I'm used to it. But I'm not trying to rumor monger here. What I'm trying to do is report the news, and it's out there on a very major scale. And what's troubling again to me is that there are details in this. You just heard Raj say, though, when people fabricate, they go overboard with details. But yes. Tara, back to you from the judge's perspective. What do you think's going on in Judge's mind, seeing all this back and forth right now about this?
Well, I'm not sure how closely he's following all the back and forth, but what I can tell you is it's not good for, and it kind of is bringing to fruition some of his concerns about things like, having cameras in the courtroom and some of these other stuff about what is happening outside and kind of the flurry of these folks that are crawling under or crawling out of whatever rocks they usually hide under and coming up with crazy, stuff. And so if he is seeing it, I would be concerned as a judge, there's no way to stop, someone who has this kind of malicious intent and I'm not, the whole thing is very suspect to me. The information that is allegedly, was said by this family or this relationship that was so cultivated. I mean, it's not consistent with anything we've heard so far. It's not consistent with anything that's been released so far. And the other part of this is these are some serious accusations to make. If they're false, and this author or person or journalist, whatever we want to call him, is making these accusations. He's making an accusation about, potentially some tampering with a witness could be a potential out there, depending on what these text messages were and how they were obtained, whether through, a grand jury proceeding or through a witness that, these roommates who were there. I mean, that's a very serious accusation to make, that there's a family member out there who's getting in the middle of this. And I don't think that it makes a lot of sense. I think, I would note that just on a detail that is coming out right now. I mean, there's just been subpoenas now for Kohberger's like Amazon, history and records and other phone records. So how would they know what whether it was a Dickies coverall or not? I mean, who would know that? And so it is completely inconsistent. And if this judge may have pull everybody back in and just reinforce, the gag order that's there. If a grand juror just goes out and starts talking about the evidence that was presented, it's not, my experience has always been that jurors, whether it's in a grand jury or juror at a trial take their duties and responsibilities pretty darn seriously. And so this is quite the leap to say that a grand juror would have, shared some of this information at all. But.
And it's a grand juror that lives in a very small community that has to continue to live there, work there, and they're going to be the ones responsible for getting this thing, way off track. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
I would believe this if there was no money to be made. If this was information and it did not affect the bottom line of that reporter. But come on. Who knew this guy? Who knew this stinking story? It has literally come from the ether.
Right.
And it really smells bad.
Yeah. And I'll say, Joel, that I'm glad you're bringing it up. I mean, not to give this guy more airtime than he needs, but at the same time, I think, this conversation is important because people really have to think critically about the information that's out there and where it's coming from. And I think what it does is it makes people understand and be a little bit more selective about who they're turning to for their sources of information. And I think this one should be suspect, especially when there's an anonymous person, involved who's giving information. It's like, why anonymous?
Yeah. Right. And the other part of it, Joel, is that it really does add to the judge's control of this case and keeping cameras out and the gag orders in place, because he knows that the evidence that has to come in is what's going to come in through those doors that a jury's going to hear. And it's not going to be, just out there for everyone to hear otherwise, to try and get as much control around it as possible. And that drives some, I understand, really crazy that they think that these courtrooms should all be open. But in the age that we're in now, with the type of internet and trolling that's going on, I think the judge has to keep a very, very tight control over these proceedings.
Hey, Mona, I love Tara's commentaries. We have the best guests in all of true crime. I just saw this comment and super sticker from Christina Jones. Dr. Raj, how would you respond to excited utterance? She's basically calling out Steve Gonzalez, the father here. Sorry for your loss, but dude, you've made your mind up publicly before you've heard everything at trial. It's sad for everyone. I've got to say, on Steve Gonzalez's, in his defense, God forbid that was my daughter, and I have two of them. I would be unhinged. So I don't know. This is tough for me to read this comment for this person, and I'm sure excited utterance means it well. But how do you take this comment? What's your response to this person?
I guess at the bottom line, it's control the controllable. Okay, and there's certain things as a parent. You're a parent. There's things you can control, but wait a minute, there's things you're never going to be able to control. And I guarantee you, to the age of your babies, you're going to lose control. So
I already am.
And so, hey, mine are grown up. Lord help me, man. I went from a genius to an idiot in 1 year. That's just how it works. So, the thing is that this is a great testament, us talking and I'm going over, this is a great testament of the structure, the hard structure of the legal system. And I want to say over and over, that's why it works. This is, you can simply do this, Joel, by playing the game of telephone. Get 20 people in a room, tell the first person to tell the second person, and I guarantee you by the time it gets to the 20th person, it's nothing like what the first person says.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's kind of what we're doing, what the internet is allowing us to do. Let's take these people's lives, let's minimize them by gossip, and let gossip telephone around, and then anonymously. They might as well said, the Montana Bigfoot came to me and said blah blah blah. But come on.
Well, I'm glad that Tara's got my back, and echoing the fact that she thinks it's important to talk about this, because I do, but a lot of people are going to take it the other way, thinking that we're just making the problem worse. But You know, as a journalist, we usually talk about these issues, especially when they are in the, in the public eye. But Gerald McCrill says, why are the jurors even talking? I mean, that's what we're talking about. We don't know for sure that they are, but if they are talking, these grand jurors, then as Gene was saying, it's a real big problem. I was thinking about this myself. Andy School, she's a friend of the show. Phil's going to have a fit about news with made up texts. I'm afraid to ask him about it tomorrow, but I'm going to ask him about it. And he's going to he's not going to be happy. Uncle Phil Waters, America's most respected detective. So just to round this part out, now we'll get some final thoughts. One of the final pieces in this story is that according to this Howard Bloom guy, Steve Gonzalez was also allegedly talking to an FBI informant who Steve was trying to get information from, and then the FBI threatened legal action. Again, Gene, this is crazy. Alleging that Steve Gonzalez went to an FBI informant to try to get info. The FBI found out about it and basically said, hey, back off. We're going to do what we need to do legally. If any inkling of this is true, where do we end up?
Well, you end up in the courtroom, again, a lot of this doesn't get you anywhere, because you're only going to hear the evidence that's relevant and admissible in front of a courtroom, assuming that we get there, right? I mean, this case isn't going to go away, and it's not going to just get dismissed with Bryan Kohberger. You're just walking free because of this. There's all kinds of things that can happen between now and then. If somebody is that out of line with their behavior that the court has jurisdiction over, and ordering them to cease and desist on certain sort of things, if that is even close to being happening. There was an issue that did come up, but I don't remember it all specifically regarding the FBI. I think it was on the DNA, one of the DNA analysts that the state had received information about supposedly a new witness, and they sent the FBI right over to her house to talk to her. This was after the grand jury proceedings, and the defense came back saying that there had been some interference, or they thought it was some witness tampering. And the state said, we absolutely had a right to go and find who this witness is and to find out what information she has. This is not a fact witness. This is an expert witness. And if she's got some information that she thinks changes the dynamics of the DNA, then by God, you got to turn that over, and we want to know. I mean, the state is not interested in going to trial on somebody who they should believe who they would think didn't do it. And if they had some exculpatory information on the DNA or something that really led them to some other place, the state is not going to drag all of these families and all of these communities through something like that. So, I don't know that it gets us anywhere. If somebody is so out of line with their behavior, the court has lots of things. The judge has lots of things that they can do. They can hold somebody in contempt. They can tell them, cease and desist. There's lots of things that a judge can do, but it's not going to throw out this case. Bryan Kohberger is not going to walk away without having to answer to this at some point in time. It might get a little messier, but it's not going to change. I mean, it's going to go forward.
Yeah. Elizabeth Whitney, I love Gene with the heart emoji. I keep telling you guys, best guest in true crime, better community. So there is an official response from Howard Blum, the writer for Airmail, and he says, and I quote here, 1, I have no wish to get into a public argument with Mr. Gonzalez. He and his family have already suffered too much pain. 2, we both agree, this is important, we both agree on that I never interviewed him, as the article clearly states. So he's admitting he never interviewed Steve Gonzalez. 3, my portrait of a grieving father was based on a trove of texts he wrote that were made available to Airmail, his public statements and interviews with people close to him. But now those texts, those trove of texts are allegedly fabricated, made up. Raj, to you, what do you make of that statement? And we'll close out with a Gonzalez statement and final thoughts. What do you make of that statement? Does he sound like a guilty man, or does he sound like an innocent man who is being twisted around like a pretzel?
Smells like an excuse to me. He's making excuses. You know, it's like looking at an animal who sees they're in trouble, they start backing up. Sounds like he's backing up. Yeah, and what's interesting is, you know, anything can look great from a distance, but man, when you put it under the microscope, it's a whole different issue. And I guarantee you, that guy's going to be under the microscope, and it's not a pretty moment. I have talked to people under the microscope, and let me tell you, that's hot and ugly there.
Ketchup says, I feel for them, friend of the show. Prayers to the surviving roommates. They are victims too. That is a true statement for sure. Cindy Hollenbeck, who's coming to us from the Pullman, Moscow area. Great woman. Happy to see her here. This is Gonzalez family quote we pulled up here in response to the airmail article. As it is common in these situations, people try to make money off of the dead. It's a free world, and people can write and say pretty much anything they want these days. Most of the time, my family and I just ignore the chatter and the noise, but lines have got to be drawn somewhere. We will close out on that and take some final thoughts. You know him well by now. Tara Malik, looking for her official bio here. There it is. An Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has expertise in everything in life. She's an expert in life. Tara, this was a crazy conversation because there's so many, mitigating factors and disturbing things swirling around in the air right now, revolving around this case. But how do you see this all moving forward?
Well, it'll be interesting how it moves forward. I mean, speedy trial was waived, and so we're waiting on a new trial date. We obviously have these pending issues with cameras in the courtroom and how much we're going to be a part of this process and be able to kind of follow along or not. But I guess, my kind of concluding thoughts on this is more of a request too for everybody out there, and to kind of follow your lead and think critically about some of this information that is coming out, and really to be a little bit skeptical of the sources that they're going to for this information, if not just as a general policy, but really for these victims and the families who are in a lot of ways, the criminal justice system is not kind to victims. It's not on purpose, but it does re-victimize victims. They have to go in, they have to testify, they've got to be kind of pulled into the spotlight, and it wasn't their choice. And so, my heart goes out to them, and just sending them lots of good thoughts and vibes in the midst of kind of a storm of individuals who are coming out and trying to capitalize on this pretty horrific situation.
Speaking of that, I just lost a comment, but someone's telling me not to have J. Reuben Appelman on. He's the guy who wrote While Idaho Slept. Curious to get, I will listen to you guys. Send me email, Surviving the Survivor. Here it is. By the way, Pam Hart Young says Moscow is a close-knit town. They don't talk about it. According to my daughter that lives there, it's hard on the locals. Very small town, obviously. Umbrella says Appelman. By the way, I think it's Appel. I'm a stickler for spelling. Should not be given a platform. Propaganda. Let me know what you think. He's supposed to come on the show next Thursday night. Do you think we should hear him out? He has written a book, While Idaho Slept. I am always open to hearing what STS Nation has to say. Look at this. This is a rare to hear this. Sharon Conroy, you are awesome, Joel. No one cares about the haters or trolls. By the way, I just want to say, in all seriousness, I absolutely love and adore my mother. Would not be anywhere without her. She says sometimes I'm tough on her on the podcast. I'm poking too much fun at her. She's sensitive these days, and I have to be cognizant of that. So I love my dear mother. I would be lost without her. And she's honestly, and I'm not saying this because she's listening, she is people say this about their parents, but when you have a mom who's a Holocaust survivor who lost a child, who was in a war in 1973 and a lot of other things, She takes no crap. She takes no prisoners. She's the strongest person I know. My dad passed away, not to get all mushy and emotional, but she marches forward and never lets anything set her back. So she is my role model in life, and this is true too. She is locked in the closet from Jersey Devil. Dr. Roger Rhodes, he is a therapist in private practice in Greenville, South Carolina, specializing in dysfunctional relationships. He's worked with inmates inside prisons. I once had a boss, may he rest in peace, died of brain cancer. He's a great guy. Man, what a depressing thing to announce publicly, but it's true. He once said, Raj, people, the problem that won't go away. Do you agree?
Yeah, people can't help but be people. You know, we talk all about perfection, and people are at the center of flaw. You know, another thing I want to mention is be as good of a son to your mom as your mom is a mom to you.
That is great advice. Jean Fisher, what can you say about her? Yeah, Jean Fisher is the queen of prosecutors, especially out of the great state of Idaho. 33 years of service. She ran the ship there. Jean, I know this is troubling to you. How troubling is it?
Well, I mean, there's just different aspects of it, right? I mean, we want to see justice done. If the Latah County believes they've got the right man, that Kohberger committed these crimes, and we want nothing more than justice for these families. And we want to make sure that Kohberger never has an opportunity to ever do something like this again. And yeah, I don't say that lightly, because if there were somebody else, I mean, the state is not interested, like I said, in making mistakes and getting the wrong guy. And in the process of doing that, it's not just about the trial. It's not just about all of the justice and what goes into that. There's so much about humanity and empathy that has to go into this, because the fact of the matter is the families are never going to get what they want out of this. They're never going to get their children back. They're never going to get an explanation from Kohberger that's going to satisfy them about why he did what he did and why he picked them. And the burning questions that they have are never going to be satisfactorily answered. And in the core, I mean, in all of that is the humanity and the empathy that has to go on, because it has affected their lives, it's affected a community, it's affected that university. And we all live with that. And, our job is to try and make our communities healthier and safer, and better places to live. So, I mean, there's a lot on the line here. I do have faith in the system. I have faith that we will get this right, and that justice will be done. But I hope that people remember themselves in the getting there.
Well said. Chelsea Whitaker, let us also remember that our country is founded on innocent until proven guilty. And Bryan Kohberger, of course, is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Elizabeth Whitney says, I love Jean. Geraldine McCrill already said, I'm not watching that show if you have that guy on. Miss Wee Lassie, I listened to that author the other night, and he was so boring. That's not good for me. That doesn't bode well for me. And basically talk salad. He has nothing to say. He has nothing to say. The book seems ridiculous. Well, that's a amazing endorsement of this guy. I've not heard him interviewed, but we'll have to I guess we'll have to reevaluate. A quick programming note, by the way, we all want a Carm for Christmas. Yes, we do. I love Dr. Raj. Irish McGlass says, remember, Joel, without Carm, you wouldn't be here. We know you adore her. On it goes. Quick programming note. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern time, Uncle Phil Waters is going to have a stroke when he hears about this story. I'm sure he's already upset about it. Plus, we've got news in the Ellen Greenberg case. The young woman who was found dead in 2011. She was stabbed 20 times. 10 of those wounds were to the back of her neck and head, very back of her neck and head. And independent autopsy found that 2 of the stabbing wounds came post-mortem, meaning she was dead, and it was ruled as suicide. So that's a crazy story. We're going to talk about the news in that story tomorrow. And then Monday, counting on Steve Cohn to come up with something for us big. Tuesday is Dan Markell. Wednesday, Suzanne Morphew. Thursday, we're back on Bryan Kohberger, and we do it all over again. Until then, love you, America. Hold on. I have to get you guys the closing music here before we go. This is my job here. Love you, America. Love you, Idaho. Love you, South Carolina, Oklahoma, the Republic of Ireland, Tasmania, Bangladesh, and, of course, Israel. Till next time.